Hello and welcome everybody to yet another episode of HR Breakfast USA with my lovely colleagues, Callie.
Hello.
And Toby.
Yo.
Toby and I feel your pain in the States today because we are going through the heat wave. Obviously in the UK, we do it faster, bigger and better than anyone else in the world because we'll do it for one day. So one day only, we have our heat wave and our internets are all on the skew, which is why I'm on the phone. So fingers crossed, we're going to be good.
We only had to go live twice, so hopefully technical difficulties are done.
Excellent. Excellent. That terrified Toby and I with the day we're having with our internet connection. This is like, ah! Anyway, enough about being very British and talking about the weather. What are we here to talk about today? Why is it when companies break people's trusts that they don't talk about it? What is this deal with them covering it up? Because ultimately, we are working with people, right? We're going through an evolution, a workplace evolution. Things are going to go wrong. And with that, some trust might be broken or eroded. But surely the best way to do is talk about it. Not force mandatory return to work. Forget the 9 to 5. I'm really on one today, aren't I? I've kind of taken over Toby's. And really building that peer-to-peer relationship with our employees rather than rushing it under the carpet when we've lost that trust. Why do companies do it? Who wants to start? I mean, I really don't mind. It's such a big one, this one.
I can go first. Sorry, I've got a book and I was just flicking through the book because I was like, oh, I literally just read a story about this stuff. And I was like, okay, I'll find the chapter in the book and talk about that. It's just, well, I talk about always the same stuff because the core root of the issue, and this is why Freeform was founded, is to solve the core root of the problem, not add on all these extra things, is that there isn't an equitable, definable, mutually beneficial, whatever you want to call it, relationship between employees and employers. So therefore, the transparency and the trust isn't there because there is a line of division. A company I used to work for was really good. It's like, oh, we're going to be really open, super transparent. And I was a director at this company, right? Yet there was still a drive on the shared drive that I wasn't allowed to see. This wasn't a massive company. There's still, we're going to be really transparent, but you can't have access to this folder. And then the next layer down is like, we're going to be really transparent, but you can't have access to these two folders. So I instantly knew it's like, okay, this is the Toby folder, and all the secrets I'm allowed to see are in this one, but then there's an extra level. And I think it's that, what have you genuinely got to hide? And I don't think it's like necessarily people want to have the warts and all to see everything, but it's like having the option and the conversation or even the awareness, because in that folder, I have no idea what was in it at all. So even just an awareness of what was in the folder and be like, oh, actually, I'm not missing out on anything. It's fine. But it felt like I was missing out on stuff. Like, what was the gossip in there? Who's got a criminal record in our company? That's a typical one from the US version of The Office. They hire someone with a criminal record, and then everyone is all like, who is it? Who is it? But I think that's it, right? It's the secrecy just completely erodes any trust you'd have there.
I think it's the lack of accountability when they get called on their bullshit, if I'm being totally honest, right? Like, I think usually people get, like, you let a lot slide, right? Before you finally have to bring something up as an employee. And I think there's so much just like brushing it under the rug, and you become the problem because you called someone out on something that they have absolutely no intent is correcting as a company. And that, I think, is a huge, huge violation of trust. And you can't really go back from there. And so I think there's a lot of good faith on the employee side until there's too many reasons to feel that way anymore. But everything is then pushed back on that individual as, well, you should have had better boundaries. you should have done something differently, rather than saying, hey, we got here together or despite one another. How do we move forward in a way where we can continue the trust? I think that there's so rarely the accountability on the business end for that relationship to be repaired in a meaningful way.
I also think there's an element here from, say, the leadership, where if they have to make difficult decisions that they know teams aren't going to like, but there's a reason for it, rather than be dictatorial about it and say, we're having to do this, you should, you must, words no one likes, right? These are words we do not like.
Nope.
Having that communication in terms of, this is what we've got to do. We know this is tough. We don't want to do it. This is why we've got to do it. This is how we're going to work through it. And this is how long it's going to be in place for. I think there's another piece that, rather than hide behind the must and should, being able to have those conversations is far, far probably more difficult to start with, but surely it gets better results in the end. And I just don't understand why more leadership teams aren't doing this. Amazon was a great one. 2 years ago, 2,000 of them walked out in Seattle because they started to do the mandatory return to work. And that's one example of how things have been handled so badly.
No, sorry, Kelly. You look
No,
like
go ahead. Go ahead.
It's just it goes back to the old thing, right? That you can't prove or disprove that it adds value to the organization. To create. Does trust equal better performance? I'm going to cough. Does trust equal better performance? And no one's ever bothered to try and correlate those two things together, because, like, well, why would we? Because training equals better performance, or positive company culture, more benefits, all of this equates to better company performance. And again, with all of those, it kind of relies on employee engagement and sentiment to kind of go, like, do you feel like you have enough benefits? Do you feel like you get enough training? Rather than, actually, is it making the business a better place? So what is the metric?
Yeah.
Like you would evaluate trust on in an organization?
I think innovation was the one that I've seen most regularly, where trust and psychological safety are imperative for being able to make mistakes, right? You can't innovate without making mistakes. And so if you don't create an environment where people have time to be brainstorming together, time to be building relationships with one another, to build that trust, you are not going to see high levels of creativity, innovation, team cohesion.
Yeah.
So that's where I've mostly seen the connection to trust. But then again, it's talking about the psychological safety component of trust, which is a big part of it, but not all of it.
So that's interesting. So it's the behavioral indicators of trust, right, that you want. The innovation is a pretty good one, right? Because if you are innovating, if you are leading the way, then you are probably outperforming your competitors. So therefore, there is a strong correlation to company performance. I think that's one, and then you probably need like more. But again, no one goes on that journey. No one starts where you started, Callie, but then no one then goes on the journey to equate it to company performance. And it's like, well, why not? That's kind of what you're in the game of. That's what you have to do. I think if I reflect on some of my own experiences in that challenging, so there's the innovation, but then there's the ability to challenge upwards as well. The 3 past companies I've worked in, I've challenged upwards every single time, because I am a little bit of a rebel in the workplace. I am very passionate about my work, yada, 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 as you can imagine. And so therefore I challenged upwards. And all of that was met with, no, we don't think so. And it's like, well, you haven't even let me have the conversation about it yet, or acknowledged it, yet alone, rewarded it. But you kind of just get shot down in each of those instances. And I think that's the natural default of leadership, is not to be challenged. Like, I'm as a leader, I want to be challenged. I got here because I'm really experienced and I've been here for ages, yada, yada, yada. Who gives a shit? Like, you have to be open to be challenged. And I think that then breeds innovation as well. And I don't, we always tag it with leadership, right? But I think there's that, can you challenge other people as well? I don't necessarily it's leadership, but yeah, challenge. Like you do in Scrabble. You Scrabble, someone lays down a word that you don't think's right, you challenge it. Because that's the system of the game that enables you to do that. But the system of the game of work doesn't enable you to challenge, because you kind of go, oh, I can't challenge that because otherwise I'm breaking a rule.
I hate Scrabble so much.
See, I love it.
If my husband would have
how
been
dare
here, he
you.
would have immediately started laughing when you said Scrabble. Because I'm competitive, but I also, I don't know, spelling is not my strong suit.
So, I mean, you could literally say it's a word, and Toby and I would go, sure, yeah, okay, quietly look it up on our phone and go, she's wrong. But, you know, we've all done it. And I think actually this is a really good situation and analogy, isn't it? Because, you know, I've challenged in the past, and I remember many years ago I worked for a large PR firm, and I was fired from this large PR firm because apparently I wasn't doing my job, when actually the director above had completely broken my trust. She'd gone in to see my clients behind my back, and she'd explained things about certain technologies in completely the wrong way. And I can't say any more than that. But that trust was broken, so much so that when it came time for me to leave, I had my lawyers opposite. The MD was called over from New York. She sat down, she said her piece, I said mine, and I left with a ton of clients. She got fired a few months later, but the trust had already been broken. And my point to that was, I was in combat mode. I'm going out of here, and I'm going out with a fight. And this is what I'm leaving with. So I spent all my working time, therefore what I was being paid for, to build a lawsuit against them. And we came to an agreement. So trust is so toxic. This is over 20 years ago. And when I hear this company's name now, and I still know people from that company, it still sends shivers down my spine. The organization itself, funnily enough, the MD I have huge respect for. And if I were to see her again, I'd say, let's go out for cocktails, because I think she's fabulous. But that's 20 plus years down the line.
So I think you hit the nail on the head with the 20 plus years piece of it. I mean, all three of us, because we've talked about it, have these massive experiences that you just get worked up even talking about from significant amounts of time ago. And there's nothing unique about any of us in that regard, right? Most people have those experiences. And I would argue, if you don't have experiences like that, you probably, either you've been in a unicorn situation where you have an abnormal team, or you haven't fought the good fight.
And maybe it's a bit of both, right? Because I'm sure that, you know, the contrast to that is, I'm sure we've all been in teams, and I have, where I laughed, cried, hated it, loved it. But again, 20 years down the line, the whole team got together when one of us had died, without exception, from all over the world. And I think that's exceptional trust. But at the time, it was brutal, it was tough, it was hard. So how we define that, talking about it, is very different, isn't it? And it is about personal experiences and what we all now want from that, if you like, from that relationship.
It's weird, isn't it? Because like, once you've left an organization, the conversation you're willing to have about that company becomes a lot freer, unless you're contractually obligated not to mention some stuff. So it's trying to, well, there's two things you can do, right? You can try and enable that conversation to happen whilst you're working there. Ain't no employer I've worked with or for has achieved that. Quite hard to retrofit it as well, I'd say. That to create it from the get-go, when you're maybe 2 or 3 people big, I think that just organically happens, right? Because you have no other option than to be open.
Right.
But when you get to anything bigger, all of a sudden you have to work at it and do it by design. So I think that's one point. But I think the other point, to your point, Sam, is that when you leave an organization and that conversation becomes a bit freer, even now, I'd still be willing to have that conversation with that employer. If they asked me, I would tell them. And so, but there is this finite moment, there's this kind of moment in time where contract ends. We don't want anything to do with you. You don't want anything to do with us. Let's just all go in our separate ways. And it's like, well, we, as customers, we build deeper, more meaningful relationship with brands way beyond just the purchase. And I think, you know, if employment is the purchase, what is that aftercare that helps build your brand? And that's really valuable because, Sam, that example 20 years ago, how much value has that added to the company or taken away from the company? And the fact that you've talked about them for 20 years and you'll have mentioned their name to some people. You're not doing it on the live stream, wise, but with a cocktail, you'd have mentioned it to some people. This company is shit. And you've been saying it's shit for 20 years in private circles. And you've told hundreds of people this. And therefore, you are having negative brand equity on that company every single time you get your loose lips. When you have a cocktail, you start going, well, this company's rubbish. You shouldn't work for them, right? So understanding that isn't, you're not a lost cause by that point. I think that's the other thing is like, you can bring that back, but you have to talk to that person and kind of go, why did you leave, Sam? And what did we get wrong? Like, what did we get? And is there any way we can fix it? Talking to you 1 year down, like immediately, let's not go down the exit interview thing, but I think in the immediacy of the termination of a formal relationship, nobody's going to have a good thing to say generally there, unless it's not an amicable split, and then nothing needs fixing anyway. But how do you feel, 1 month, 1 year, 10 years down the line and keeping that engagement? And if you refuse that engagement, well, there's the biggest indicator anyway. So I think it's just important to fix the internal stuff, but also recognize that once someone's left, you still have that ability to talk to people because, the internet exists.
Yeah. And it goes back to something that, I'm quite passionate about, which is these alumni. I think they are so important because more and more people will leave an organization and perhaps come back either in a different guise, in a fractional guise, or in a completely different role or a part-time role. Perhaps a couple of years down the line, they don't want the same relationship. They want that relationship to stay. So that's so important. I love it. Can you tell we're all at home? And, I think there's a piece there to your point, Toby, that being able to have that conversation 6 months, 12 months, 18 months down the line, as I said, interestingly enough, the brand itself, I haven't been very kind about it during a few cocktail hours for a few people, obviously. But I still think how that MD handled it was exceptionally well. She did an absolutely cracking job. And I would sit down with her and have a cocktail anytime. And Toby, you've raised a really interesting point that I haven't thought about. I've separated the brand from the person. Isn't that interesting? And I've only just had that kind of aha moment, the power of the people, right?
And then you can place value on that managing director had such an impact on you. And there's your differential, right? Okay, did you leave because of your leader or because of the company? Or did you leave because of your team and the company? Go, well, I left because, no. I really like my leader, but I don't like the company. Okay, well then there's a mismatch there. I hate my leader. I really like the company. Like, evaluate the difference between those and kind of go, okay, if you really liked your leader and you still left, there is something toxic going on culturally within that organization, which is inhibiting trust. You've got a trusting relationship with the person, but not with the organization. You've got a trusting relationship with your team, but not with the organization. Then you flip it around. I think that's a really interesting metric. If you had those three metrics, how much do you trust your leader, your team, the company? Just ask those three questions and measure those and measure the variance. You'll get some really interesting results. Then, to Callie's point, are we innovating? Are we not innovating? What is our trust barometer telling us? Now, I take it back slightly because I always say survey last approach. That's what we do. Survey last. But when I talk to a company called Brave Goose, for example, who are based just down the road, is like not actually against asking questions, but you've got to really interrogate why you're asking it and if it's going to add value to the individual. So there's a motivation to answer it, right? So I think you get to the point where you kind of start designing this stuff with intent. So those 3 questions there are incredibly powerful, rather than how are you engaged with your work? What's the EMPS score? Blah, 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 blah. It's like, actually, we can get some really interesting. And we've done it, here in 20 minutes, we figured out the 3 questions you could probably ask your people to evaluate the trust in your organization. Like, but you know, I think we get stuck in the default about, okay, these annual, monthly, whatever pulse surveys, we just churn out the same questions without really interrogating them. We just create more by addition rather than actually could probably reduce and filter.
Yeah. Well, and there's so much more to it. Are you bringing someone else in or something where people have trust that they can provide an honest answer? Because that's a whole topic in itself, right? Yeah. I think most people in this day and age are pretty wary of giving accurate negative feedback about a company, regardless of whether or not it's deserved. And so I feel like you get the people who don't have a filter, don't quite understand being 100% honest. And then it's easy to explain away and say, oh, there's always a few bad apples versus, well, it's really hard to know the validity of any sort of employee survey that you're doing at any point in time when there's no guarantee of anonymity on the employee side.
Yeah. And that trust works both ways, doesn't it? Because, Callie, you've said something interesting there about that anonymity. And is there a situation where, and how, wrong question, how can you create that safe place where maybe, as I had, that immediate line manager, if you like, was the real problem? As I said, several months later, she was spectacularly fired in the middle of the floor. But if the MD had taken me aside, you could be damn sure I told her exactly what I thought. So is there a situation and scenario whereby we're trying to overprotect with this anonymity, and actually we need to find this kind of middle ground person that bizarrely they might well be, as in my case was the MD, but I'd have told her, I'd have been more than comfortable to have told her because I respected her. Can that anonymity actually hold us back from being able to have some of those tough conversations?
Well, I think if you're asking it to be anonymous, that's, again, don't even ask the rest of the survey. Just send out a survey saying, would you like this survey to be anonymous or not? Yes or no. Then they click and then just analyze the results of that. Don't even do the rest of it. Because if people are saying, yes, I want this to be anonymous, then, our people want to tell us something, but they don't feel empowered enough to even put their name to it. Like, to want to say something and feel so afraid not to be able to put your name to it, that's ridiculous. That is ridiculous. Like that is a clear, and I think you just use that as your another indicator, right?
I love that.
Yeah.
Well,
and if it takes you 6 months to analyze that,
that's it, right? And I think,
yeah.
And then you get to it. You're like, hey, we've given you 5 minutes. Oh, that old thing at the end of the meeting. We'll give you 5 minutes back because there actually isn't a survey. So, take the 20 minutes you're going to do the survey and have that, go and take a break. Like you've penciled in half an hour. And that's, how lovely is that as well, to be able to do that and kind of, and that would, you kind of build trust. I don't know.
I think I'm going to butcher the actual saying, but the trust is built in drops and destroyed in buckets. I think that sort of idea of, we forget about how hard it is to actually build a situation, an environment where people do feel the safety and trust that we really need to move our workplaces forward. But you do one stupid thing, or you have one bad person that's allowed to continue to behave terribly. and it's gone. It's so complex, and we often forget that. It's not hard to do the right thing most of the time, I think. But trust itself is a very complex emotion, feeling, sentiment, and we need to tread lightly.
It's interesting, isn't it? And for me, this has been such a thought-provoking conversation because, Callie, you're so right. The complexity of this is something that, as you talk about it, there's so many different areas, there's so many different levels to this. There's so many different scenarios as to the perception. Here's the thing, the perception of that trust being broken and it actually being broken, and therefore how we go about fixing it because of all the characters that might be involved. Roll into that, work from anywhere situations. It becomes really tough, right? Because I'd love to do this topic again because there's so much on this. I can see that we've got a comment, and as I'm on my phone, hands up and glasses. I can't read it.
Yeah, so Dara said, how you as a manager, leader, colleague react to complaints, feedback, and comments. I think that's a really, really important point to make. Yeah, we all have the power to be conscious of how we're responding to all of that. You actually brought back a funny memory I'd forgotten about. But I'd actually been offered a position, and there were quite a few red flags. And I was like, yeah, but those are easy things. And my job coming in is going to be the culture champion. So like I directly get to fix these things and I can show impact right away. Right. And so I brushed it off. And then there were a couple more. And then we'd agreed on the terms of my employment. And then they backpedaled. And we're like, oh, never mind. I talked to so-and-so and I couldn't do that anymore. So I did this instead. And so I didn't accept the position and said, if I can't, how do you expect me to come in and be the person who's supposed to build trust in your teams, fix your culture, because those are literal words used, when you can't even be transparent about me that you messed up and agreed to something that you didn't have the authority to agree to, apparently. And so it's funny because it stopped it before it's even started. And now I use that as an example of I clearly dodged a bullet because I'd already set aside, I don't know how this is going to be, but I can help. And I think, we do that a lot, hopefully in the hiring process right now in general. But to me, going back to what Dara said and why I connected it here is that was the CEO and founder of the company who apparently didn't have the authority to agree to what she had committed to with me. How do you tell me that you that you're handling this in a way that shows that you're going to be a partner in this?
Wow. So the trust was broken before we even began.
Right.
And yeah.
Right. And so therefore I didn't begin, right? Like I wanted out of a bad situation, but not bad enough to run to something that looked like it was already going to be a bad situation. And that was one comment on one day after I'd already verbally accepted. So to Dara, to your point, I think that to us, it can be a very flippant remark or just a casual like, oh yeah, we can't do that anymore. But when you're on the receiving end of that, with all of the context and baggage that's potentially attached to that one tiny little comment that was out of your head the moment you said it could be the straw that broke the camel's back for someone who is highly productive and effective in the organization, but just can't do it without support anymore. And so I think, my big thing that I talk about is how we need to make people feel significant. And if we've made people feel significant, we've done a lot, right? And so from a trust standpoint, if you approach your employees with the idea that how would I want to be treated if I were them or what I know of them, and have that significant perspective, whether the news is good or bad, you're going to set yourself up better for responding in a way that brings people with you rather than building a wall between you.
Yeah, I like that.
It's hard. to sound like a broken record, but it's like, it's just good employee experience design. That's all it is. Like the fundamental problem with most employee experiences is try to hire a diverse workforce and then treat them all the same. And therefore you only then have people with longer tenure who kind of fit in. When actually you said you didn't want that, but that's what exactly the system you've created. So, you know, the trust probably goes the same way, right? That we hire for the, you know, a diverse workforce, but actually only persona 1 actually feels like they are able to operate in that environment with trust. Persona 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, yada yada yada, all come to work not being able to trust the company and the people around them. And therefore, you kind of have to change. Or don't say you want a diverse workforce. Don't say you want different types of people coming to the company, because you can't say that unless you're willing to design your workplace properly to accommodate.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's one thing to say it, it's another to really carry it out. This has been a really big conversation today, and it's, for me, it's really made me think as we were going, and there's a lot for me to go away and digest as to, you know, the complexity of trust in organizations. Why are more people coming out? Well, we know why they are, and therefore how that impacts them in their new roles, whether they're coming in to set up their own businesses, whether they're going into other roles. It all impacts down the line. And that's my biggest takeaway. Toby, what's been your biggest takeaway today?
I think it's the measurement of trust. So I know there's when you look up trust, there's so many different frameworks, like the trust equation, very common one, but no one actually tries to measure and evaluate trust properly. And what this conversation has taught me is, like, it's not actually that difficult. There are some, the kind of spark that Callie set off is like, there are some key behavioral indicators of trust or lack of trust. So evaluate those. Don't do nothing more than evaluate those, because you can then trust the process in that if you have trust, performance will go up. Then you have to, you know, use the Freeformers mutual lifetime framework to make sure that, you know, you're measuring the trust equals company performance. Side note, but start with the first thing, actually measure trust.
Yeah, brilliant. Callie?
Yeah, no, I love that as well. My brain's been spinning about, you know, if you wanted to hire an independent consultant to come in and support a culture analysis, like being able to do a survey that just says, we're going to conduct a survey. Should it be anonymous? Should it not be anonymous? That should be enough proof for you to be able to get buy-in of whether or not you've got the trust established enough where people will participate, or if you need to create that extra barrier if you're interested in getting honest feedback. I think that's a fascinating approach that would yield incredible results.
Totally. As you can tell, I think we could all talk about this for a lot longer, and there's so much more going on, and I can see all three of us thinking about different ways we can move forward with this in our own respective businesses, and I'm sure we're going to come back to this. But in the meantime, I would like to, as ever, thank everyone for continuing to message all three of us with your ideas and your suggestions. Keep them coming. We love your participation.